You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brooke-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. Our next upcoming crucibles, Waking the Wild Feminine and Waking the Wild Masculine, are now sold out. And Jonathan and I are feeling so honored to lead those courageous men and women on this journey of the wild soul. If you missed out on joining us for those, then the next way you can walk this path is by joining us for Waking the Wild Sovereign in its brand new evolution, which begins in November. This is our most intimate crucible, and it's currently the only way to work with us one-to-one. It is the path of freeing yourself from conditioning and wounding, discovering and expressing your unique gifts, opening your heart and following your soul path, becoming the sovereign man or woman you came here to be. It's already filling up with the kings and queens who have heeded this call. So if you feel it could be for you, then go along to primalhappiness.co/WTWS, short for Waking the Wild Sovereign, to discover more, and you can arrange a call to explore it more with one of us. And now onto this week's show. It's with my friend, Jonathan Bowden. Jonny made the transition to coaching, consulting and training as his main vocation in 2014 after several years of working in the corporate world. He had a lifelong calling to growth, evolution and full realization of human potential, and has combined his passion for personal development and change work with broader business development and strategic consulting roles in both the public and private sector. His own personal experience has shown him there is little that a committed human being cannot achieve, create, recover, or come back from. No exceptions. His own work embodies both the internal and external experience necessary to achieve this. In this show, we explored expressing your truth, even when it could cost you the approval of others, and the challenges and gifts that this way of living can bring. This show was a result of an invitation I made to Jonny because he models this so beautifully, so powerfully. I really wanted to share him with you. And the conversation actually went even deeper than I expected. I absolutely loved it, and I suspect you will too. Let's dive in. Hello, Jonny. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Leanne. Great to be here.
Feels like long overdue. But we've known each other for so long.
Yeah, we have, and we've sort of been feeling this one out, I've sensed, for a little while. But no, it's good to finally be here and get a chance to do it.
Yeah, it really is. And it felt like a really timely and juicy topic back whenever it was, a couple of months ago, we first started talking about it. And then as we've been having a chat just before hitting record, I'm like, oh my goodness, there's even more here than I was initially seeing. So I feel like this is one of the shows where it's going to be a real service, no pressure, but it's going to be a real service to listeners, because I think there is something so foundationally human in what we're going to talk about, that it is one of those shows that's like so applicable for everyone if they've got ears to hear how that's the case.
I would agree. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah. So we're not going to dive really into the content of this, but I think I'm going to need to give some context as to what I witnessed, if that's okay with you, because otherwise it's just going to sound really vague. So course, over the last 18 months or so, the world at large has been experiencing the phenomenon known as COVID, and then all of the different things that have come about as a result of that. And it's been really fascinating watching people's responses, particularly people who have some degree of leadership and influence, and to see how different people are creating with that. And from quite early on, I noticed that firstly, you seem, from my perspective, had a strong call to voice where you were on it, what you were seeing. And then secondly, that you appeared to be doing so in the knowledge that was going to cost you in various ways, potentially, but clearly like people were going to not approve of you, people were going to be upset with you, it could affect relationships and all sorts. And I could witness some of that actually happening in the Facebook comments. And I'm assuming some of that was happening kind of outside my view too. So I was witnessing, on the one hand, I was really appreciating a lot of the content of what you were sharing, but on a deeper level, I was really appreciating that energetic you're occupying in order to keep expressing what you saw as true and useful, despite the fact it's going to have consequences. And that's something that I was like, oh my goodness, that is something that is so medicinal to witness, to feel, like the activation and the opportunity, that invitation that creates for everyone, regardless whether or not they agree with you or disagree with you. That's golden. And so that's really what I wanted for us to explore, not anything to do with COVID itself, just that energetic that you're inhabiting and creating from. So there's no question there, but I'd just love to know, I guess, first and foremost, like, was how I experienced what was going on for you at that very top level, that you kind of felt this call, were kind of like, you know what, I'm following that no matter what. Was that actually what you were experiencing it as?
Yes and no. So without either getting bogged down in content or detail or going into too much background, I would say that the events or whatever that became more apparent in the world 18 or so months ago, in some sense they were kind of new, novel, different, to most people's eyes and ears. They kind of came from nowhere, had never seen anything like that before. And then there are other people who maybe saw a longer tail to what has been going on and perhaps still currently is. So by the same token, I would say that, whenever it was 12, 18 months ago, I didn't start a new walk. This was, recent events, as I think I've sort of shared or offered to you before. It's almost like the volume has been turned up on the whole of life. So in one sense, this was new, slightly different, but in another sense, it was, just a more heightened version of what had always been, both on the outside and, as without, so within, also on the inside. So my decision, which I wouldn't really say I experienced or would think of as a decision, I can see why to an outside observer it might seem that way. It wasn't so much a new path that I chose to walk or to follow. It was more a new opportunity to kind of continue, deepen further, whatever kind of metaphor or analogy we want to use for, the journey that we're all on, sort of physically, spiritually, emotionally, all of that. So in some ways, yes, a decision, but in other ways, not really. It was just a new opportunity within the context of the kind of bigger picture, wider journey that I was in.
Yeah, that really makes sense to me. I guess the way that I would relate to that personally would be going back however many years ago. I definitely did make a clear choice to live from soul. It was a very clear choice I made a number of years ago, and it's like, come what may, that's now where I'm being led from. And then as things have come into my awareness as being aligned with soul, it's kind of a choiceless choice. Like, I may spend a bit of time, I like probably one of the most recent examples of this was training in shamanism, which I did have quite a bit of resistance to, but it was kind of almost like, well, the choice has already been made because I already made that choice way back then, which necessitates I say yes to this. So it's not really a choice. It's just a matter of time before I kind of get on board with it. Sometimes it's smoother and more elegant than that. That was a particularly graceless, resistant filled experience, but it feels to me something akin to what you're describing there.
Yeah, I think where you use one word, I would use another. And again, I don't think it's a difference in what those words point to, but the word that I would use would be truth. That is, I would say, a kind of guiding light and principle for me in most things. So again, I guess to relate that to the events of the past 18 months, I saw what I perceived as a significant degree of untruth being kind of promulgated quite vociferously from many, many quarters. So my sort of actions in the external were, I guess, to some degree, in my own little way, a kind of counterpoint or counterbalance to that. Again, I have no illusions of grandeur and that, it's going to change anything on the bigger level, but just doing my little bit. And I guess for the listeners or anyone who may be watching this down the line, the really, really important thing for me in that, I would say, if on one level we've kind of got truth in the world, truth of content, that's to some people an incredibly important level, possibly in terms of impact and influence, the most superficial level. Very easy to get kind of hooked up on the level of content, detail, matter. That's the level that most people spend most of their time on. On a deeper level, I would say that the thing or the things that help me to be in and live from that place, firstly, I would say it's a deeper connection to my own personal truth. So objective truth out in the world as a function of personal truth within. And then even deeper than that, I would say, that as informed, advised, guided, mediated, whatever it might be, by what you might call universal truth. So, the sort of the totality, the truth of what is that, exists and will be regardless of anyone's particular opinion or perspective or personal context. Yeah, and in terms of my journey, it's when I started to really look more on those levels, again, do the work that I needed to do to get more clean and more aligned on those levels. That's when the type of, again, air quotes with fingers, behavior that you observed showed up. And by behavior, I mean what I did, what I didn't do, how I did it, when I did it, all of that. But also how I was able to interact or be with, again, the perceived or purported consequences of that behavior, which, again, I didn't necessarily experience them as such in that way, in a kind of 3D workaday, everyday level. But yeah, all of that is sort of emanating from that deeper place. And of necessity, without that, there is nothing that happens out there in the world.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like I want to pick from like my favorite children to go with this. Coming to one of the things, this is almost like the tail end of things, but is where my attention's going at the moment. So I'm going to trust that. So certainly looking at it from the outside is easy to project on you that you're experiencing what's coming up in terms of, for example, comments from people disagreeing with you, for example. It's easy to project on you that you're having a certain kind of experience of that. But I'm hearing from what you've just said that your experience of that probably didn't match what a lot of people may have been projecting on you. That sounded a bit intangible. So what I'd love to know is a bit more like, say, for example, and I saw you get into some quite heated debates, let's say, with a mutual friend. I'm not going to name, and it's, I was curious. I wonder what's going on for both of them in this. And so I'd love to know, like, when in examples like that, what was your experience? What meaning were you taking from it? What actions were you taking off the back of things like that?
I'll do my best to answer that question. And if you feel like I'm not answering the question that you asked, and that's important, feel free to pull me back. But the first thing that comes to mind on that one would be, so in terms of my experience, to me, there are things that are either true or not. There are things, ways of being. Again, the word I would often use for it is a kind of an energetic alignment or a tone that either rings true or doesn't. And again, in my opinion, that can be true on a personal level. But I think there's also that sort of deeper level, that sort of tone of truth or tone of knowing. And again, in any given moment, we are either in that or out of that to a greater or lesser extent. I'm certainly not putting myself forward as, I'm in that all the time. And of course not, no one is. But in terms of my personal experience, if I encounter somebody who clearly has discords in their field, their tone is off in some way, and on a deeper level than just personal opinion. So a lot of people would relate to this as, the easiest way of describing it might be with reference to emotion. So often in the presence of heightened emotion or trigger, that's another word that gets used. Trigger and heightened emotions are usually indicators that that person is not living in being from that deeper place. Mm-hmm. And again, this isn't personal, because I no belief about it. I know that this goes to the impersonal. So, in any given moment, we all have the opportunity to kind of check in with ourselves, like, how am I doing right now? Where am I at? Again, some people are brilliant at that. Some people are awful at it. Some people think they're good at it, but actually aren't. Some people don't think they're very good at it, but are actually really good when they go there. So in terms of, if you like, being willing to take heat or whatever on a Facebook chat, I would liken it more to, so on the basis that something is either true or not, or may not be true, with regards to any particular issue. If my ultimate kind of beacon or lighthouse is to truth, I don't need to get offended whether I'm right or wrong. Something like the COVID situation, it looks to me on a kind of global level like it would be brilliant if everyone was committed to truth without agenda and without recourse to, personal opinion, sentiment, motive, whatever it might be getting in the way. But in terms of my interactions with other people, I would say, imagine if a complete stranger walked up to you on the street and started effing and blinding and called you an idiot, and it come out of nowhere. You're like, I don't know this person. What they're saying doesn't seem to be referable to anything that I can put my finger on. I don't think I've done anything. You wouldn't necessarily want to fight that person or shout back at them or whatever, but you also probably wouldn't take on board the content of what they were saying and take it personally. Like if someone did that, you would probably be more likely to go, their behavior appears to be a product of where they're at emotionally, spiritually, mentally, psychologically, than it does a true and accurate reflection of my soul. If you bring it a bit closer to home, somebody who you love, somebody who you value, someone whose opinion you hold dear or would give usually a lot of credence or credibility to, again, we can often act in very sort of defensive and protective ways where, whether we know it or not, whether we would admit it or not, where we're coming from is really more about protecting or preserving the self, our personality, our opinion, our agenda, our ego, whatever it might be, as opposed to a deep inquiry and seeking after this thing that we could potentially call truth, whatever that might be, wherever it might lead. So again, from somebody who I maybe had a closer connection with, if they were to offer me an opinion that's contrary to mine, again, no need to get offended. Either what they offer brings me closer to truth or it doesn't. And if I'm not trying to defend or protect myself, I'm open and available to be with different perspectives and opinions, in pursuit of truth, come what may. And again, in terms of content or the exchange that might take place, the whole sort of gamut of human behaviour is on the table as far as I'm concerned. I don't think that we live in a world where we all have to speak nice and quiet and meditate and talk in a nice voice. I'm quite happy to kind of throw the gloves off and throw down with people if need to be. But again, it'll all be what comes from that place and what's, at least in that moment, in service of this thing I'm calling truth.
I love that. So bringing that to, as you say, there's a degrees of, I guess, intimacy that are going to affect how much, like, what's getting created in each of these exchanges. And I love and agree with everything you've just said there. And I'm kind of like putting myself in the shoes of listeners who are like, okay, so what you're saying, Jonny, is all well and good in the, say, for example, it's your, I don't know, close friend or mum that is, in this instance, upset with what you're saying. So you're over here, reliable to do your own work with what's coming up. That's not necessarily going to be the case for the other person. And so they're likely to stay upset. And so again, I'm thinking it through the lens of, actually real conversations I've had with people where things like this have happened. And it's recognizing that, however they're able to be with what's created for them, there is this kind of extra thing to be with, which is what's being created over there in terms of a mum still being upset with them, for example. So I'd love for you to, it may be a kind of slightly, I suppose I want to ask you two things. One, what's your experience been of that? And I'm not expecting you to kind of necessarily name particular relationships, but if you can talk about it in as general way as you can. Sure. But also, because your experience maybe not is what's going to be what's available for everyone right now, I'd love you to also speak directly to someone who's still struggling with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think so. Let's find out. And to the extent I think I do, I think that's a really, really great question. So in terms of my personal experience, again, on a kind of outside 3D level, I've experienced the whole gamut. I've had people who, if you like, would agree with me and probably always would have done. I've had people who I've had interesting discussions with and may have come round to agreement with or may not. I've had people who have been, to whatever degree, mildly, moderately, staunchly against my sort of position vis-a-vis the content and the issues. I would say the key thing, though, would still be the place that I stand in vis-a-vis all of that. So I'll say this and then I'll try and come to your other question, but I'm in a place now where, honestly, Leanne, to the most extent, other people's opinions on me or on my opinion are pretty much irrelevant. And I say irrelevant on an energetic level. I don't seek to dismiss anyone on the level of content or personality or character or soul or whatever. And again, because I fear that could well fall foul of the point you made a minute ago. Yeah, to somebody who might not feel like they're there, what I would point them back to would be So if somebody was listening to this and they were thinking some version of, oh, bloody hell, Jonny, that sounds amazing. I'd love to be in that place, but I'm not. Like, and I've got what I could do to even begin to get there. The path, if you like, and this isn't a methodology. I'd encourage anyone listening, think of it more as a sort of spiritual journey, which you could conceptualize as a path if you wanted to, but it's definitely not kind of linear like that. But what I noticed, what I observed, what I look back and see in myself, maybe in an earlier time in my life, was that I wasn't particularly connected to myself. I didn't know myself very well. I didn't relate to myself very well. And everything that involved and everything that resulted in. As I got to know myself more, I became more comfortable and more familiar with my truth, my personal truth. As I became more comfortable and more familiar with my personal truth, I was able to begin the inquiry into the deeper truth, the sort of capital T truth. And so for anyone listening who sort of hears something in this but wasn't necessarily sure where to go with it, I wouldn't necessarily encourage them to just resolve to wake up tomorrow and start being really gobby about stuff and starting arguments with people, because again, honestly, that's really not what it's about. And whilst that may be well-meaning and well-intentioned, again, on a whole number of levels, it would quite possibly be quite destructive for them and their relationships. But yeah, the pathway to that place that I see, it's a place of deeper personal inquiry. Again, if I was to go even more granular, most people say yes to an awful lot too much in this world. Most people say yes to an awful lot more than they should on the outside. Both sort of tolerating and accepting things that are, overtly negative and destructive, and also things that just don't serve them, that aren't in true alignment with who they really are and what they're supposed to be doing here in the world and why they're here and all of that. And also, most people tolerate way too much from themselves. They entertain way too much within their own being that doesn't serve them. So an aspect of this also is effectively saying no to a lot of stuff within yourself, behaviors, attitudes, ways of being, that kind of thing. Now, the hard thing with that is that, especially somebody who feels like they're struggling or suffering or isn't doing so well, in the short term, it can feel like a sort of stripping away or giving up of the very little that they may feel that they have. But what I have seen consistently, reliably, what I've experienced in my own life, what I've seen with clients or other people, is that at a certain point, you will get back to that place of no thing. A place of, again, in 3D terms, perhaps characterized by not much. Some people have to strip away an awful lot to get there. But that in that place, something can be found and reconnected with, which is so powerful and so potent and so crucial and so important. And that once a person reconnects with that, that is that thing that will lead them and guide them, if they let it, in all aspects of their life. It isn't just, it'll tell you exactly what to say on Facebook. But yeah, certainly that amongst, the many, many other things that we need to do and make decisions on in life.
Oh yeah, I love the depth of your answer there, Jonny. Thank you. It's as these things pretty much always are, there's, I guess, roots in to this work, let's call it. But ultimately, like, the work is the work, the journey is the journey. And it's kind of like, it can be easy to think, oh, so I just need some nice, neat technique to be able to deal with the fear that comes up with me speaking my truth. But there's there's a rabbit hole that goes so much deeper, that's beyond and before that, which I think you've just touched on so beautifully. So There's something you said there that really, and again, I think this is an example of one of those threads or one of those like roots in to this kind of deep work. And you said something like, we say yes to far too much, both in terms of what's going on out there, but also what's going on internally. And I don't know if you were meaning this at the time, it's fine if you didn't, but what it was reminding me of is, I'm going to say it like there comes a point, and I don't necessarily know it is literally one point, but a shift that I've noticed happens and has happened for me and has happened for people around me, clients, students, friends, where it no longer feels an option to cling to victimhood. It's like that, for many years, that was like a go-to. Then it became a kind of like, oh, sometimes I'm going to be able to, not be a victim, and sometimes I'm still like going to be immersed in victimhood. And then it feels like there's a place where it's just like, even if I find myself going there, I'm not really available for it. So I know that, getting out of that place is the work. Like it's no longer that like tempting that, like, come back. And it does feel that in some ways, I've made it sound binary, but I kind of feel like it is a binary thing. It's like, I'm no longer a yes to that. It's no longer going to be the thing that's going to compel me at any rate. Like I may still have that voice come up or that feeling come up, but it's no longer going to be a place that I'm willing to make decisions from. So that's what popped up in my mind as you said it, but I'd love to know what actually you were thinking of when you said it.
Yeah, again, great question. So I would say that victimhood is one of several flavors that thing takes. I do think there are others. But I think victimhood is a really good example to use because it's one of the sort of bigger, more obvious ones, and it's one that a lot of people in their own way can probably relate to. So for me, the way that my version of that choice occurred was, it was the point in time where I would rather have nothing than what I'd been getting up to that point in time.
Oh, yes. That's that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's that as a sort of a concept or a nice idea. And then there's that in reality. So there's good news and there's bad news. So the bad news is there's also a part of this that is quite confusing and often needs a bit of working out. So when we talk about saying no to things, or saying no to things in the external, saying no to things in the internal, which you sort of characterized as victim behavior or victimhood. Again, there is probably a couple of others that I'd throw into the mix there. If it's that one of like, if we're saying no to something, then what are we saying yes to? And for a lot of people, sort of casting off or shedding things that may have served them to some degree, or may have served them in the past but don't anymore, or may be somewhat helpful, but they see that there's a greater cost or consequence to them, the benefit or gain, so they would be willing to give it up. It can be really hard to sort of be willing to let go of or forego stuff if we don't know what's going to come in to replace it. So there can be an element here of it feeling like a leap of faith. So this isn't necessarily the next move, but again, for anyone who's listening, who's asking that question, the thing that you're saying no to is anything that isn't something that completely enlivens your spirit and your soul. Again, a word that might be used would be anything that isn't some version of a compromise. So to relate it back to the early conversation and posting in Facebook, I'm not going to water down my opinion. If I think that, something is a certain way, and I know in my heart and my soul and my bones that it is so, I feel no need or no compulsion to equivocate with people. Again, another hugely powerful one when it comes to people is the need or the desire to relate. We've all got to relate. We've all got to be nice to each other. I could never possibly break connection with somebody. So we'll go around like, bullshit relating to people who we really don't like and completely disagree with under the guise of being pleasant or social. That to me falls into that category of stuff you probably want to be a little less inclined to do. But yeah, once you strip away all of that stuff, you will get to the sort of space of empty, this void space, which is a void, but it's a, again, if I was to use a real world metaphor, it is like a sort of universal womb that is completely pregnant with possibility and the seat of all creativity, and like everything is contained there, everything that you could possibly want. But it's very, very, very hard to hear the words that come from there when you're getting clouded out by all the bollocks and all the noise, all the nonsense. I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this show. We'll have to
you have now several times. We're going to have to mark it as explicit anyway. I was just making a mental note to tell the team, mark this one as explicit. It's all good. It's all good. It just means some parts of the world won't get to hear you. Right. Oh my goodness. We're almost up on time. So what I'd love to know, and I mentioned this before we started recording, is there isn't like a point really where we can say like, and now after having done that, like clearly you're still in it, but you have got some experience now of having created what you've created over the months, and here you are in this moment. I'd love to know what your reflections, learnings, I guess, is there anything that I guess you would, this is a stupid question because, like, hey, we can't go back and do things differently and we wouldn't anyway, but, like just taking that at kind of whatever level you want to, but just really would love to know what you've taken from how you've shown up over these last months, both in terms of the internal experience, but also what that's created differently in your world.
Yeah, so you mentioned this earlier. So the big fear that I imagine a lot of people might have, again, on a kind of work business, another huge one, if we're putting it into the, talking about things like victim, would be, I think this one's possibly even bigger, but reputation. That's one of the things that people are massively fearful of giving up, even if it's not really worth much to begin with. So if you were to look at most of the kind of common and garden metrics and measurements of success in life, I'm more successful now than I was 18 months ago. I say that as a fact just because it is. So it absolutely isn't the case that by being and living from this place, okay, great, Jonny, you get to go on some big moral crusade, but are you destitute and on the street and have you lost everything? No. But more than that, Leanne, and this, I think, is the thing that was probably the most surprising to me, because again, there is an aspect of this and this way of living and being that can seem like it could be a huge risk. There is a point where the internal experience becomes the reward in itself. And I think there's also a way where, if conditionality is sort of coming back into play. So if someone was going, oh, Jonny said his business is doing better now. Oh, well, go on then, I'll do it. Go on. You kind of can't game the system. Like, that's just your ego jumping in and trying to take control of the wheel again. Mm-hmm. And the ego, or, that aspect of us, whatever you want to call it, it's hella sophisticated. Ironically, people who are smart have a worse time of this because their egos are like way strong and way crazy developed, and they can run rings around most people, including themselves often. Most people's egos completely have them fooled. But yeah, there's a way in which sort of living in and from truth, it kind of is its own medicine. And there is a point where, beyond question, you really just couldn't do it any other way. There's no shouting from the rooftops, there's no vitriol, there's no like planes going across the sky, no kind of fanfare. It's just that sort of still small voice within that, you know, you're being authentic, you're being you, you're exactly where you need to be in this world, doing exactly what you need to be doing, and the rest really will take care of itself. Now, again, what I've seen in my own life, what I've seen, I would say with most people who I think have been on some version of this journey, in the external, yeah, maybe it does tend to polarize a little bit. Like, you'll, in some ways things will be brilliant, and in some ways certain people might not like you. But I'd also say there's a way in which you're way less attached to all of that as well. The external results really just are what they are. And, you know, I just know that I will be taken care of by, you know, whatever is beyond the physical. Like, I know that, like I know my own name. It's you know, one of those things that when you know, and it's almost hard to put into words because you're trying to sort of explain something that it's sort of beyond words. But yeah, once you touch that knowing, it will carry you forward. It has its own sort of self-propelling quality. So, I mean, I've been off Facebook for a month. I've been serving some time at Mr. Zuckerberg's pleasure for saying things that he didn't like. Meh, so be it. You know, it's not like I compulsively need to be on Facebook, you know, fighting the good fight and defending the cause and all of that. It's all good. It's all good either way. So yeah, there's also an aspect of this where I think for most people, a greater level of sort of equanimity in life, whatever happens to show up or not.
Yeah. We are out of time, but I just really want to highlight that you just said, because we touched on it right at the start. I think before we started recording, I can't remember if we actually ended up talking about it on the show. I don't think we did. And how you were going to paraphrase, really saying, you know, there's this way of being where we just create with whatever's showing up. We see it as grist for the mill. One of the phrases I always use is material for liberation. It's like whatever's showing up is material for liberation. And from that place, it's like, it's not a kind of Pollyanna-ish bypassing and saying everything is awesome, although honestly, that is a tendency of mine as well. But it is really recognizing like everything here is something we can use to create with and from. And that way of being in the world changes everything. I loved the phrase you used earlier about that pregnant with possibility. Yeah, that's what life becomes.
I know we're doing time. Can I just say one more thing quickly?
So
the other thing that I think is maybe good news is, like, the other thing I've seen and I see with everyone who walks this path, that stuff that at one stage of our evolution is kind of the nonsense and the chaos and the bullshit and the annoyance and the frustration and the stuckness, all of that kind of messy glob of horribleness that seems to kind of ail and afflict us. That is the good stuff, and not in a kind of reverse psychology reframe way. That is literally source energy misused, because we're not in alignment with our own energetics. We're misusing our own power. We're sort of training the guns back on ourselves. Again, if we were to have another half hour, we could talk about this, but at a different stage and from a different place, that is the stuff you play with. That is where the gold is. That is where the magic is. It isn't that changes and becomes something better. You relate to it and use it differently because you're the same you. You're just in a different place.
Yeah, I'm glad you added that. So, yeah, this has been gorgeous. We've ended up going to a much deeper level, actually, than I was thinking we would. which I always dig. So yeah, I've really enjoyed this. Where can listeners find out about you and your work, which I'm sure someone will want to? Someone will hate you, obviously.
Oh no! But honestly, I want them to look me up as well, Leanne. I want them to look me up as well. You know, I've had enough experiences in my life of at some point coming across someone who I, was very oppositional to. Who, yeah, there's often something there. So, well, no, people will know whether they want to or not. Facebook is the easiest way at the moment. I'm
when you're
pretty
not in jail.
low tech when it comes to.
When you're not in
you can
Facebook
message me.
jail. Yeah.
You can still message me. Yeah, I'm pretty low tech when it comes to all this. So I'm not like websites and landing pages and all of that junk. Yeah, look me up on Facebook. Feel free to ping me a message. I'm in Leanne's group, so you may see me hanging out there. But yeah, for anyone who'd like to, yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jonny. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Thanks, Leanne.
Oh my goodness. What an amazing show. Here are my takeaways. Jonny shared that for him, living from truth is a way of being that means expressing his truth even when it might not garner approval. It is a choiceless choice, and this was already present for him pre-COVID, and this period simply presented a new opportunity to continue deeper and further on that path. The more we're grounded in our own truth, the less other people's reactions will compel us to take action. Every time we're feeling compelled, it shines a light on where there's work still to be done. The reason to live this way, devoted to truth, isn't to get external rewards, although they may well be present. I love how Jonny expressed it. There is a point where the internal experience becomes the reward in itself. If you'd like to get notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 336. And if you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or your app of choice and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll get each episode delivered straight to the device as soon as it comes out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.